Improving Deuteronomy 21:10, taking a woman slave captive.
So, Joe, are the legal codes oppressive to women that we see in the Old Testament?
Are the legal codes in the Old Testament actually oppressive toward women? Let's see what the apologists actually think.
Make all kinds of cultural assumptions about an ancient world that actually we don't know very much about. But the more you dig into the ancient historic culture, the more we understand that actually far from these codes being intended to be oppressive towards women, actually they're there for the protection and honoring of women.
Oh, I see. The Bible doesn't mean what is actually written on the page. We don't know a lot about these ancient cultures, but once we dig into these cultures that we don't know a lot about, we can insert our own subtext into the Bible so that it doesn't seem so insane.
Let me give you one example, Deuteronomy 21. It talks about the treatment of female prisoners of war, and we read that and we flinch. But actually, when you get into the text, what's it saying? It's saying rape is not okay in ancient Israel. It's saying if a man desires a woman, then he has to wait a full month after the battle to make sure he's not doing anything out of lust and to give her time to grieve her old life. If he still wants to marry her, he can, but only if he takes her as a wife.
Highlight of the video!
If he still wants to marry her, he can, but only if he takes her as a wife.
What the fuck is she even talking about here? Listen to what she says. If he still wants to marry the prisoner slave captive, then he has to take her as a wife. This is circular as fuck, and ultimately, it doesn't mean anything. If I can speculate for a second and insert my own subtext in here, let me tell you what I think the apologist is actually trying to say, but can't. If the guy still wants to have sex with the girl after the 1 month waiting period is up, then he has to take her as a wife. But that doesn't sound very godly by our 21st century sensibilities. What happens if the woman doesn't want to marry the man? Does she have any say in this? Doesn't that all sound kind of rapey from an anti-rape passage? It really just sounds like rape with extra steps.
That just sounds like slavery with extra steps!
Fine, I stole the joke, but my point still stands. Whenever listening to an apologist, it is always important to read the passage that they are talking about, because it rarely says what they claim it does. So, that being said, let's take a look at Deuteronomy 21:10. Deuteronomy 21:10, marrying a captive woman. When you go to war against your enemies, and the Lord your God delivers them into your hands, and you take captives, if you notice among the captives a beautiful woman and are attracted to her, you may take her as your wife. Bring her into your home, and have her shave her head, trim her nails, and put aside the clothes she was wearing when she was captured. After she has lived in your house and mourned her father and mother for a full month, then you may go to her and be her husband and she your wife. If you are not pleased with her, let her go wherever she wishes. You must not sell her or treat her as a slave, since you have dishonored her. Nothing in this passage states that slavery or rape is wrong. It does set up the 1 month waiting period, as she mentioned, before the guy can marry the girl, but it doesn't say that the reason for this is lust. The reason that they give is that this allows the girl time to mourn the loss of her mother and father. But the only reason she lost her mother and father in the first place is because this guy and his people took her away from them. And where in the passage does it talk about what the woman wants? While I agree that these Old Testament laws, such as the ones outlined in Deuteronomy 21:10, have to be viewed within the context of the culture, this still doesn't change whether or not the actions themselves are moral. That is, unless you ascribe to a moral relativist theory. Something tells me that Mr. and Mrs. God is the source of our objective moral code wouldn't agree with this. Ultimately, though, to say this passage is empowering to women seems like a huge stretch.
And in that way, she's given full family status in the Israelite community. And then if it doesn't work out, then actually he has to treat her as a wife, not as a slave, and he can't sell her on. She is set free. So it's hard for us to understand that code, but actually in an ancient context, far from this being about dishonoring women, it's about trying to protect and care and honor them in a culture that's messy and bloody and difficult. But the intention of the God of the Bible is always to elevate and care for women as far as possible in that tough ancient world.
So if this is the divinely inspired work of God, then I should have a very difficult time making this passage better. Humor me, though, and let me try anyway. When you go to war against your enemies and you take prisoners, treat them nice and don't rape them. If you see a pretty girl, especially don't rape her. In fact, just don't rape anyone. If you do decide to marry one of your prisoners, this is a bad idea. I would probably reconsider. If you fail to reconsider, please don't rape her. And if the unthinkable happens and your marriage doesn't work out, please don't human traffic her. In fact, you probably shouldn't traffic anyone. It should not be this easy to improve upon the Bible. It would seem that if the text were meant to say something, it should explicitly say it rather than leave it up to such severe interpretation. You shouldn't have to have an advanced English degree to interpret the divine basis of our morality given to us by our Creator. In fact, if this was an English paper and you were to turn it in with this interpretation, the teacher would more than likely fail you. There is no other text in the entire world that one would interpret so favorably. What makes the Bible that one single exception? I guess they shouldn't expect anything less from a group of people who see satanic messages in episodes of Family Guy and The Simpsons and hear demonic voices in Barney songs.
You guys are the fucking worst! Your gods are alive! Fuck you! Fuck nature and fuck trees!